Alright, we're going to go ahead and start up. First thing we want to do is open up our glass photo. You can go up to File and Open, or if you'd like, the quicker way to get to it is just by double clicking on the background. We'll open up the folder. It's going to be inside of Glass. We have Glass Photo. Let's go ahead and open this. The glass photo image document we have, this is just a photo of some glass. It's pretty complicated and complex with a lot of shape and movement going on. So we're going to try to find the easiest way to use a filter or multiple filters to create this same effect. To start off with, this image is actually 512 by 512, so let's create a new image document. Now you can push Control N, or you can go to File, New. Once this comes up, our name, we'll just call this Glass. And the width and the height should be 512 by 512 pixels. The resolution, leave it 72. We're going to stick with the 8-bit. Go ahead and click OK. Your image document, you should notice it's about the same size. If you got an image document different size, be sure to double check your image size for it. What we want to do to start off with is create basically the same type of values that are going on, where we have darker values in here, we have brighter, higher contrast areas throughout here. Be sure that your background, your foreground color is black and white. If you have different colors, say for instance I have a red and a lighter red on this color. Simple way to do it, just change it back to your background, foreground color is default. You can click on the button here, or you can push D. D will set it back to the default mode for you. Now once we have it set to black and white, go up to Filter, and inside of Filter you want to go down to Render and click on Clouds. The first option you're going to find is that it gives you just basically a simple white and black with a lot of gradient throughout. What we want to do is create more of a higher contrast with a brighter white over here and a darker black here. So we're going to go back up to Filter, go back down to Render, and then click on Difference Clouds. This is going to pull out a darker element to it. Now at this point we have closer to what we want, however we don't have the whites and the blacks in the right spot. So I'm going to go back up to Filter, and if you notice the first option, it says Difference Clouds, Control F. Now we've looked at this before, but just to remind you, you can click on this or you can click on Control F. It's going to redo your last filter statement. At this point I'm just going to click Control F a couple of times until I find the darker area on the left side and the brighter white area on the right side. Once you go Control F a few times and you actually begin to find it, once you find a really good one, go ahead and stick with it. This one's pretty close. We've got a lot of bright areas up in this. We've got some dark areas going all the way down. Okay, our next step is going to be recreating this glass fill over in this image. What we need to do is actually create a black and white image. It's going to represent our height map for all of these pieces. That way we can use those inside the glass filter option. Fortunately for us, we've already created one. So if you go up to either File and Open, or you double click on the background, open up your glass filter image PSD file. It should be inside your glass folder, and click Open. This image, this basically represents all the layers that we currently have, the depths and everything of our photo for our glass. If you notice, we have 4 layers over here. I'm going to turn off the top 3, and let's go ahead and start off by looking at the first one, which is glass tiles. This is basically showing you off the white border. It's showing the black pieces, which basically represent the glass on the inside here. It has a smooth corner rounded off on the sides. Each one, if you notice, some of them are a little bit at angles. They're not perfectly straight. Try to represent it the same way it was in the photo. I'm going to take the glass inset and turn it on for the visibility. This one just simply created a white box on the inside. If you notice the border thickness here, up here and onto the side, this border thickness, trying to represent it the same way so that when we do the glass filter, it'll create that same, at least a similar effect to it. The other one is the additional noise. Now if you notice, when I click on this one, this basically creates just some more noise pattern inside of it, so that it's not so flat. And finally we have a square pattern. The square is representing that back square in there. Now there's a slight difference though, right? This one, lots of waviness to it. Every one of these pieces has a non-straight edge to it, whereas our square is just basically a square. So what we want to do is select our square layer, And let's go up to Filter and go down to Distort again. And inside of Distort, there's one called Ripple. Go ahead and select Ripple. And the Ripple option, this is going to allow us to actually have more of a up and down motion. It's just going to be a nice filter wave to it so that we don't have to actually draw it in. Go ahead and set your amount to about 200 and then click OK. Alright, so with this we've actually created close to, it's not exact, but it's pretty close to the similar shape. We're going to use this shape and go ahead and save our file out. We'll save it as a PSD file. Alright, so the next step will be to close this file out, and we're going to go to our glass texture, and then we'll want to go to Filter, go to Distort, and then click on Glass again. And when your glass window opens up, we're going to select not from the drop down option here, because our option isn't available. Right next to it we have a load button. If you click on the drop down button here, you can choose the load texture, and when you load your texture option, you're just going to simply load the glass filter image PSD file and click open. Now by default it's going to change the texture to your glass filter image. At this point I actually want to take my scaling back down to 100. Since we're not trying to make it larger or smaller, we want to make sure that this is at 100%. The distortion level, let's go ahead and take this to, we'll say 18, and then your smoothness, if you take it all the way up just so you can see what it looks like, you can go all the way up to around 12, 13. It really softens it up. If we take it too far down, just like we looked at before, the hard edges, which definitely aren't visible inside of the photo, this one becomes very apparent. So we want to try to find a nice even ground that's going to show it off really well. The best one for us at this point, we'll take it to around, let's see, let's go for around a 5. So we can do a 5 if you like, you can try a 4, you can try an 8. Best thing at this point is don't just use the numbers that I'm putting up here, but actually try, do different numbers, see the results you get, start forming your own opinions as to why you think one's better than the other. So if we do this, if we go with these numbers, then we'll go ahead and click OK. And at this point we actually have the basic start to our pieces and to getting an area where we can put in a border. Alright, now that we have our basic glass pieces ready, the next thing that we need to do is try to figure out how to create this little brown inset piece. Now fortunately for us, we have that one piece already made, so let's go ahead and open that file back up, the glass filter image. And this image, what we want to do is actually get not the actual texture itself, but just the selection from it. So if you go over to your layers and you hold Control and left click inside of the thumbnail image area right here. When you left click and hold Control on it, you'll notice that you actually have your selection created around it. Now what we want to do is not worry about trying to line it up, so we're going to press Control Shift I, and when you push Control Shift I, it inverses your selection. Now using the inverse selection of it, we're going to use our marquee move tool basically. Your hotkey for that one's M. We're going to left click and drag this into our glass layer. Now all we're doing is dragging our selection, and we're going to move it off to the side like this, so we can go ahead and lower our glass filter image. Now the glass, by doing it this way, we actually set it up and we know that our border is going to be exact with the image we had before. We'll go ahead and do Control Shift I again to re-inverse it. And then what we're going to do is actually take a copy of the texture from each of these panels, and the easiest way is just Control J. Control J is going to make a copy. Notice now you have layer 1 over here. By doing the copy, it automatically drops your selection. Let's go ahead and rename layer 1. Double click on layer 1's name. This name we're actually just going to call glass inset. So with the glass inset, currently it is just the black and white. Now this one's more of a brown tone. So let's go ahead and open up our hue and saturation window. Your hotkey for that's Control U. You can bring it up through that through those options. You can also, again, you can get to it by going to Image and Adjust. Now with this one, what we want to do is actually create the colorized option, and then we want to take our hue, and we want to basically take it to a probably around a 29, somewhere around there. We want a brownish tone to it. Once we have the brown tone, we want to take our saturation down. The saturation, let's drop this down to about a 13 or so. There we go. And then our lightness, if we take it up, you notice it gets pretty bright. We're not really wanting it bright at this point. We actually want to darken it to set it off into the distance. This one, let's go ahead and take this to about a negative, we'll say about a 40 to 50 range. Take it to about there. Looks pretty good at this point. So go ahead and click OK for the hue and saturation on it. And then for our blending mode, right now this is just going just kind of flat. It's not really working with the back colors or anything, the back tones. So let's go to our blending modes inside of layers and choose your drop down option from here. And then from the drop down, let's go ahead and choose soft light. Alright, so I think we're going to stick with soft light for the moment. We'll see how it works with our other layers that we're going to create. The next one that we want to do is actually just make a copy of our current glass inset. So to make a copy of your current layer, you can just push Ctrl J. It's going to make a copy of that layer for you. Now this one, what we actually want to do is look at the other options for blending. So we're going to take the blend mode and change it to a screen. The screen's right here. Alright, and then once we have a screen, we're going to take our opacity and we're going to drop the opacity down to about a 60 to 70 range. Let's see, probably about right there. Okay, so once we have our opacity set for that layer, let's go ahead and make sure we rename this one. So the first one is glass inset. The next one we'll do, we'll just say glass inset, and we're going to define it by the blend mode. So we'll say screen, and we'll say 67% for opacity. Alright, and while we're at it, we'll go ahead and do the same thing for this one. We'll put a notation by the side of it and say that this is a soft light. And since it's 100% for opacity, we'll just leave it as default, so we won't place anything next to that. Alright, now if you haven't saved in a bit, then be sure to save the file. So we'll save this as glass PSD. Now that we have the glass inset with the screen 67, we need to create all the more like the highlights and all the little white pieces that are going on with it. One of the easiest ways to do that is select your glass inset, and if you go up to filter, there's a great option in here inside of artistic. If you go down to plastic wrap, go ahead and click on plastic wrap. When the window option comes up, you're going to notice that you have kind of all those little shiny white pieces going on there. Well, definitely be sure that you have this image sitting next to that one. That way you can be sure you're getting the right height and detail and smoothness going on. My settings for this one are going to be the highlight strength. We'll go ahead and set this one up to about an 18. The detail level, we'll leave it around 11. And the smoothness, let's go ahead and put it to around 3. Once you have those settings, go ahead and click OK. Alright, so if you notice, immediately we have more life inside of these, but we definitely have that, we're getting that kind of shape and feel for the inside piece, which is great. The next thing that we want to do is click on our background layer, and we're going to make a copy, so you can push Ctrl J. It's going to make a copy of the background for us. We'll move this one up to the top, and with this one, what we're actually going to do is call this one, we'll say this is going to be our cloud copy. So it'll be cloud copy 1. And with our cloud copy 1, we actually want to make it more that brownish tone. We're going to try to make it blend across all the pieces of glass, not just the back, but across the sides and everything. So go ahead and open up your hue and saturation window, and be sure that you click on the checkbox for colorize. And then take your hue up to the more of the brown tone, probably around the 30 range. And then the saturation, drop it down. We'll take this one down to around 12 to 15 range. And then the lightness, let's take this to about a negative 10 or so. There we go. And once you have those numbers, go ahead and click OK. Alright, so this one's going to be our brown tone. Now at the moment there's no blending option, so it's just this by itself. So we need to go to our layers and click on the drop down for blending. And with the blending option, let's go ahead and choose lighten. There we go. So this is going to help us kind of bring out the brown tone. It's not completely there yet. We want to make another copy of our background. And let's go ahead and take that one back up to the top. And let's call this one Cloud Copy 2. And this one this time, we basically want to create just more of a... we want to take the highlights. If you notice from here, some of the white is a little bit too much. We got a little bit more of a darker tones going on through here. So we want to take some of those out. And with our Cloud Copy 2, basically what we'll do is choose luminosity. If you notice with luminosity, I take this on and off, it's going to take away the bright shiny parts. So if I take this and then I take my opacity, and we'll take our opacity down to around a 30-40 range. Let's see what this looks like. There we go. So it's going to dull out some of the tones. It's not going to make it as bright and standoffish in the little areas, but we still have a good strong strength in the white areas on the highlights and on the rims. Alright. Alright, the next thing that we want to do is actually bring out a little bit more of the highlights. Now remember, we're still just trying to work with filters, so we don't want to go in with a brush and actually create the highlights. We're going to go down to our background layer and make another copy of it, and we'll drag it up to the top. Now we're going to leave it at just the normal and 100% for opacity. That way we're just looking at this layer. Go ahead and go up to select and then click on color range. And on the color range, basically what we want to do is try to grab the brighter areas. So I want to try to find more of the brightest white pieces that we can find. And then while you're clicking on it, look at the image and try to make sure that this is capturing the same whites and the highlight pieces that one is. So if I take, for instance, let's see, we can go for somewhere around there. This is going to give us a lot of the highlight pieces here and there for each one. I'll go ahead and click OK on this. And then with the selection on this, what we want to do is inverse the selection. So Control-Shift-I, and you can push backspace. It's going to delete all of the gray tone, darker areas. Go ahead and push Control-D to drop your selection. And once it's dropped, we'll go ahead and go up to our image and adjustments and click on brightness and contrast. And for the brightness contrast, go ahead and take your contrast all the way up. We want to see if we can make it really bright, really strong. Take your brightness up and see how far we can take this before it goes too much. Yeah, we'll go ahead and take it to around the 28, 30 range. If you need to go further with your selection, feel free to take it up further. We'll go ahead and click OK on this. Now I'm going to take my opacity on this one, and I'm going to drag it down a ways. What I really want is just to make sure that this is a little bit brighter than the rest of the stuff. So we'll take it up to around there. And then let's go ahead and rename this one. And this layer we'll just call Glass Highlights. And once we have that, let's go ahead and save. And then the next step that we want to do, let's go ahead and make the bar pieces. So for the bar pieces, it looks like we've got kind of a gradient. If you notice, it goes from a little bit more of a reddish brown all the way down to an off-white color down through here. So I'm going to make a new layer. And with my new layer, I actually want to have those bar pieces, these pieces right here. If you remember from our other image, let's go ahead and go back to our open file. And from our glass filter image, we had that white and black image set up right there. So go ahead and open this file up. And inside of this file, we have that glass tiles. So let's go ahead and go to the glass tile. And with this one, just use your wand tool. So you can push W to go to end. And the default is for tolerance set for 32. Should be fine for it. Left click inside of the white area to select all the border pieces. Once you have it selected, go to your marquee selection tool. Your hotkey for it's M. I'm just going to left click and drag this one over inside of this file, and then just have it snap to the edges like that. Now with this one, what it's going to allow me to do is create basically just the white pattern that's going on through here. So let's go ahead and use our eyedropper tool and then find just a good white color. Yeah, that's actually pretty close to a nice color right there. We'll just use our paint bucket, our hotkeys G, and with the layer that we've created, we'll just left click and drop in a white color for it all. Now since we have this one, we can go ahead and drop our selection. So go ahead and push Control D to drop the selection. Let's rename this piece. We're going to call this one just a bar piece. So we'll say bar piece. And what we want to have with this piece is we're going to do a bevel emboss on it. So we're going to go down to our styles. Let's see, we're going to choose bevel emboss. And on the layer styles, the style option currently is inset is the inner bevel. Go ahead and click on the drop down for it and choose the pillow emboss. Alright, and with the pillow emboss, take your size to about a 3. And if you notice, if we go too far, it just blows it out too much. So we just want to make it a very subtle image that goes around it. So we'll take our size to 3, and once we have that, we'll go ahead and click OK. Now that we have the basic one set up, we need to create one more. This time we want to create a gradient going across, and then we'll use our gradient and create some noise effect with it. So let's go ahead and hold Control, left click inside of that bar piece image, and it's going to create the selection around for us. We'll create a new layer. Remember, Control Shift N is going to create a new layer for us. This image, we'll go ahead and call it bar gradient. And once we bring it up, next thing we want to do is using our eyedropper tool, we want to grab for the foreground color a brownish red tone. Actually, this one, that looks pretty good for a brownish red tone. And the background color, we'll actually choose that off-white yellow that we had before. So off-white, be sure that you're getting, yeah, right around there, kind of an off-white yellow tone to it. So once you have those two, click OK. And then we can push Shift G to cycle through to our gradient option. You can also left click and hold and choose the gradient tool from there. Now that we have our brownish red all the way to the off-white, we can create our gradient going across. Be sure that you actually have this first option, which is going to be linear gradient. Left click from the top corner and then drag down. When you let go of your mouse, you'll notice that you create a gradient going across. We're basically trying to create that same fill. It's got a darker on the edges, it lightens up as it goes across. Once you have that fill and it looks pretty good, you can go ahead and drop your selection. And then from this option, what we're going to do is go back up to Filter. And then we're going to go down to the Noise option and then click on Add Noise. With the Add Noise selected, go ahead and create your amount. And if you notice, if I drag the amount up really high, it's going to create a really hard noise piece to it. We don't actually want that hard. What we want is just enough to kind of mix it up. Fortunately for us, we have our photo reference right here, so we can actually look at this and look at that and find out how close we are. Now, going between a range of probably 1 to 2 is going to be a good area to actually choose from. Be sure that you have uniform and monochromatic on. If you have those selected, then go ahead and click OK. Alright, and the last thing we want to do is take our bar gradient. We'll take this down just a little bit. We'll take this down to about, looks like if we drop it to around 75% or so, we'll have a nice blend between all of them. Alright, so the last thing I want to do is actually go in and take a step back, look at the original photo, look at the one that we're working with on the filter side, find out what else we can do with it. And it's a little bit washed out up in this area. There's a few areas down here that are a little washed out just due to the cloud and the difference cloud and how they came out. We have a darker area here versus the brighter area here. Those areas, those are just part of the things that in the initial steps when you start doing your render clouds, You want to try to get it as close as possible if you're trying to match the photo. For us, what I did was actually create one more highlight layer. I just took another selection and just created an additional highlight just to brighten some of the pieces up in some of the areas. Once you have that, then you're pretty close to having a glass feel and a glass look. There are additional things that you could do on your own if you'd like. One of those would be the bevel fill. If you notice, most of the shapes have a dark side and a highlight side. You can go back in with a bevel emboss and actually create the borders going around each piece. Additional things that you can add to this, if you notice there's the very, very distinct depth that actually occurs in here. You can see the cube going back into space. This happens with every one of these pieces. You can actually see that. What we currently have is just kind of like a little flat line that goes across. So if you want to add in additional depth, you can do that for each one of the pieces. Also for this one, it looks like the brown tone, we could actually increase the brightness to capture it a little bit closer as well. So there's plenty more things that you can actually do to get even closer with it. Be sure that you take some time, play around with the settings, play around with the steps, see if you can create the same one again, see if you can create a different one using the same methods and the same principles. Completes the glass texture exercise. To recap, we've looked at using the glass filter option, and the options inside of that, we've looked at the different types of glass textures that come as a preset. We've also loaded our own up as well. We've also looked at using the ripple so that we could create, rather than the hard squares, we were able to actually create the ripple effect going around it. We've looked at multiple blending options. We've looked at a couple of different layer styles inside of it. If there are any additional things that you feel like you could add to this texture, feel free to add it. Spend another 30 minutes to an hour working the textures over even further. Try to stick. One of our goals, though, if you remember, is we were trying just to stick with filters. So if you can hold back from actually using a brush and brushing on details like a little stroke going down here onto this side, try just using a filter to get the same effect. If you're able to use a filter and you're able to compile it to just numbers and steps, it's going to be a lot easier for other people to work with, but also for yourself. Whether you're artistic or not artistic, you'll be able to use the filter and the options available in Photoshop to create stronger textures.